today. This is NQF4 training, module 2. Today we will be discussing ethical business principles. Right, so we won't delay any time. We'll jump right into it and we'll get going. So what we will be discussing today are the three principles or the three pillars of ethics within the business. Right, so first and foremost, we will discuss the actual code of conduct of the PPRA. We will see where the Act ties into that, and then also ethics in general business practice. Right, so if we look at the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority Code of Conduct, the reason why they have a code of conduct is to maintain and promote the standard of conduct of estate agents, right? So to make sure that there is, and that the general public knows that we are held to a specific standard to conduct ourselves, to regulate activities of all estate agents, and I think last but not least, probably the actual thing that ties all this together is it is for the protection of the consumer, right? So property practitioners, therefore, have a duty to uphold and protect the interest of the consumer at all times, right? So that's the main reason for the code of conduct, right? So if we just have a look again at the PPRA, it's a statutory body established by the relevant act, right? So the Property Practitioners Act, and then the Code of Conduct is based on that same act, and that embodies the rules that regulate the real estate industry. Right, so the purpose of this is to provide practitioners a copy, and this is also, should any person in the general public ask us for a copy, we should be able to provide them, right? And applicability, any property practitioner defined under Section 1 of the Property Practitioners Act is applicable to and need to maintain that code of conduct. Right, so if we look at real estate and ethical standards, standards are basically a code of conduct that the realtors must adhere to, and that is first and foremost to protect clients' rights. And if we talk about clients is normally the first person that we interact with, right? So if the first person is the seller, that is our client, that is seen as our client, but we'll see that even though we have to act to protect our client, it should never be to the detriment of any other party in any transaction, right? Whether it is a once-off, whether it is a continued business transaction, right? The standards that we have to adhere to is to ensure the law is followed, right? So again, this is where the Act ties into that code of conduct, and it's also there to preserve the right to use, to own, and transfer real property, right? So that is, it ties into the whole process, right? So from starting to look for property, the negotiation process, the marketing process, the sales process, the after-sales process, and even general business conduct and ethics in an office. We will have a look at all of those things today. Right, so code of conduct or ethics, it's basically a moral responsibility, and the easiest way to have a look at that is to look at as our moral compass, right? So this is our customs, this is our values, and this is our practices. So not just in the real estate, but again, like I mentioned, in an office setting, and in some instances also as a professional outside of an office setting or outside of your professional day-to-day dealings, right? So in order to uphold these ethical and moral responsibilities, there's a couple of things that we have to look at and where we have to start, right? So the first thing is the Code of Conduct and the Act says that we as estate agents, if we want to act as an estate agent or a property professional, we need to get ourselves registered, right? So we register ourselves with the PPRA, and we get issued with a FFC or a Fidelity Fund certificate, right? So that's basically our license to sell. So first thing is we have to be registered in terms to be seen as a property practitioner. Once we are registered, it is our duty to make sure that we renew that FFC when time comes, right? And now at this point in time, it is every 3 years. So your FFC or your Fidelity Fund certificate is valid for a term of 36 months, right? Second thing that they say, which is very important, is to get qualified, right? So we can't say that we are property practitioners, get ourselves registered, but we never get qualified. We never get the training that is needed. And this is also where the Act comes in, because the Act clearly also says that property practitioners should have proper training to get qualified, to be able to call them full status property practitioners, right? The third thing that we have to look at is staying up to date with laws, rules, and regulations. So it's one thing to say, I'm a registered property practitioner. I did my training 3 years ago or 6 months ago, whatever that timeline might be. But it's very important that we stay up to date with laws, rules, and regulations, because they do change from time to time. So very, very important that we make sure that we keep up with changes, any changes within any laws, rules and regulations within our industry, right? Always a good thing to promote the interest of clients, right? And that is where we promote that not just with general public, but also with our peers. It also states very clearly that we need to treat all parties fair and with honesty. A code of conduct says that very, very clearly. And we are never allowed to ever discriminate against any client, right? And we'll get into that a little bit later as well. So the role of ethics in real estate and ethical standards is basically put together to avoid discrimination against clients, and also very important to stop fraud in misrepresentation of facts. And we will have a look on what that misrepresentation of facts can include. Right, so if we look at misrepresentation of facts, that is, as an example, intentionally misstating a material fact regarding a property, right? So let's look at some examples. Let's say we have a beautiful property that has got a beautiful view of the ocean, right? But it's not right on the beach. It's a little bit further, but it's still got a view. We can't take pictures of the beach and misstating facts or deceive the clients in thinking that property is right on the beach, right? So we can say these are your views, but we can't say that it is right on the beach if it's not right on the beach, right? Other things is deceiving clients in not letting them know of any patent and latent defects, or even exaggeration of facts, right? A good example of that is leading clients on or buyers on that a property is an excellent investment in terms of high rental, high potential rental, and then in fact, that rental might not be as high as we would have let on. So those are just some examples of misstating material facts or deception of any information with regards to a property. If we look at ethical practices and also ethics in general, it's also important that we develop a self-evaluation so that we can see whether we are on track and whether our moral compass is showing in the right direction, that we do uphold these laws, that we do the right thing, and that we can distinguish between right and wrong. Right, so all practicing agents are subject to a controlling body. We set that controlling body is the PPRA, and they are there in a capacity as a regulatory and a controlling function, right? So they regulate the industry. They regulate the registration of agents, so they make sure that, like we said previously, that agents do get registered, that they don't operate without an FFC or they are unregistered. They regulate not just that registration, but also the renewal when time comes. They manage the educational standards, so they are the body that says, well, this is what is needed to move on from a candidate property practitioner to a full status property practitioner. They also make sure that those standards are upheld and that any training works within that standard. And then in general, they regulate any activity, right? So this is where they regulate whether we are compliant in our offices, compliant with laws, and compliant with any other rules and regulations that we have discussed as an example in Module 1. Right, so if we look at context of property and real estate professions relating to the code of conduct, again, what are the objectives of a code of conduct, right? It is to maintain and promote the standard of conduct. So to know that, yes, we have a standard, and then, yes, is how do we maintain it, right? To regulate our activities, and this is now where that misrepresentation comes in, or deception, or are we registered? Are we qualified? Are we representing ourselves in the correct manner? They regulate all of those activities of estate agents. And then lastly, again, protection of the consumer, right? So they're also the body where any consumer can go to and say, well, I feel that I've been treated unfairly, or I've been discriminated against, or I bought a property or rented a property where the facts were not stated correctly, and then this body then will investigate, and steps will be taken to make sure that the consumer is sorted in a way, and that their queries and concerns are dealt with, right? With that being said, this is now where this comes in, where if all of this is said and done, property practitioners therefore have a duty to uphold and protect the interest of the consumer at all times, right? That's the whole idea of having a body like the PPRA, having laws, and having a code of conduct, is to make sure at the end of the day that the interest of the consumer is upheld and protected, and that we as estate agents can't just run loose and do whatever we want to, how we want to, and when we want to. There is some form of regulation. Right, so if we look at the principles, so moving on to the principles of the code of conduct, if we look at the ethical principles, these are things, this is now where the moral compass comes into play, right? So what they want us to have a look at is being honest. So if we do deal with any consumer, is that we are always honest, and that comes into play with both your buyer and your seller, right? So honesty and integrity, very, very important. So when we do valuations, not to overvaluate, these are just examples. Let's not overvaluate a property just for the sake of getting the mandate, right? Make sure that we always give the correct, the property valuation. Same goes for when we take our buyers. Make sure that we present that property in the best way possible, so that we can get it sold without any hiccups, without any clients coming back and say, well, I didn't know about this, or this was never told, or this was withheld from me, or whatever the case might be, right? Fairness of commercial practices. Again, this is where we need to be fair again with our peers and any practices with that, right? So being fair within the workplace and within the industry in general. Very important now, we've had a look at the POPI Act, data confidentiality. This is a big thing in South Africa at the moment, is to make sure that when we do collect data, and it's at the tip of our fingers, is that if we do collect data, if we do analyze, if we do use, that we do it confidentially, that we keep it within office, we only use it for the sake of the transaction or the business, and that we store and we get rid of it in again in good practice when we are done with any data, right? We also have to look at professional behavior, right? So how do we conduct ourselves if we do communicate with clients, whether that is face-to-face communication, whether it is via telephone or via email or any other platform, that we behave ourselves in a professional manner. Professional skills and added value. This is where training comes in. Where training is so important, so that we can add value not only to ourselves but to our business as well, where we can up our skills, where we can become more professional within our day-to-day dealings. Social respect, very important, not just for our consumers, but also for our peers, and even our competition that shares within our industry. And then also environmental care is making sure that when we do conduct any business, that we keep that in mind as well, that we looking after the environment, we do studies like we should be doing studies, and making sure that when there are developments, that it is feasible, and we're looking at all the stakeholders, not just the environment, but also the impact that it will have in the general vicinity as well. So if we look at ethics and ethical behavior in general, we can see that it's a very holistic subject. It's not just a code of conduct. It's not just the Property Practitioners Act. It goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond, way beyond any of the rules and regulations that is set out to us on or in a document, right? We have to be honest. We have to have integrity while dealing with clients, fairness, making sure that we keep information confidential. We don't just share it nilly-willy. We are always professional, and there is respect for consumers, for our peers, and the environment ultimately. Right. So, if we look at the contents of the code of conduct, principles that kind of rely on that is accountability. Yes, so we can have a set of rules, but who is accountable for that, right? Integrity. Are we looking at that principles with integrity? Are they competency, right? Are we competent enough to understand those principles, those rules, those regulations? And do we have a reasonable dispute resolution? Right. So it's very important that if we do conduct business in any environment, is that we know who is accountable, how we are accountable, that we act with integrity, that it's been dealt with competency, and we know what that resolution is to dispute any of those, right? So, and these are known as the ground rules for real estate, or we can see this as our ground rules, right? So we know who is accountable, what integrity is needed, are we competent to do it, and do we know the steps to be taken to have reasonable dispute resolution, right? To get those things sorted. Right, so still with the content of the code of conduct, the code of conduct is basically categorized into articles, or subdivided into three different categories. and those are divided into articles, right? So Articles 1 to 9 deals with duties to clients and customers. Articles 10 to 14 deals with the duties to the public, and Articles 15 to 17 deals with duties to realtors, right? So you can also see, just by looking at these three categories, that the code of conduct, again, is very holistic, right? It looks after our clients, customers, so basically the consumers in general. It also says what is the duties of the public, right? So if there are disputes or concerns or queries or complaints, what are the duties of the public? And also, what are the duties to realtors, right? So again, we have duties to our peers, and our competition as well, right? So this is nice reading. I want to encourage all of you guys to go and take some time and read the code of conduct. And if you guys have any queries or concerns with that, or you would love to have an in-depth discussion about this, we can definitely sit down and we can do this. But it will obviously be a little bit longer session. And for today's session, we will just have a look at the general overlay of those categories and those articles, right? So now we've discussed the code of conduct. We know the objectives, but why is it important, right? It is important so that there are standards, right? So standards that we must adhere to, again, that moral compass. And those are, first and foremost, to protect the clients, to ensure that the law is always followed, right? So if we talk about law, it's not just the actual acts, it's code of conduct, it's normal rules, other regulations that ties into these things. And then also to preserve the right to use, own, and transfer real estate property, right? So again, I'll say this again, it's a very holistic look at making sure that we look at the consumer, that we act in such a way that we are honest and there's integrity and there's respect, but first and foremost also that there is a standard of how to use, how to own, and how to transfer property, right? Because there are also a very clear direction on how a property needs to be, as an example, needs to be transferred, right? There's processes and protocols and stages and documentations needed. Let's say just as an example, for the transfer of property, right? So as with anything, there are also consequences if we don't look at rules, or we don't follow these rules, or if rules are transgressed. So for any non-compliance for the code of conduct and the law as well, one could lose your certification, right? So your FFC can be taken back. There's a fine to a max of 25,000 rand per contravention. And then, obviously, if you are not complying with the Act, you can also be charged with conduct deserving sanction, meaning that you can no longer operate as a property professional anymore. Right, so always consequences. Not just that, cost of non-compliance is not just those three things. It's not just cost to you as a property practitioner in terms of losing your fidelity fund certificate, or having to pay a fine, or having been sanctioned, right? There are also unspoken costs, right? In terms of consequences to your office, to your principal, to your manager, to business, to the general industry, if we don't follow these rules and we are serial transgressors. As is, I think property practitioners in general does not have a very good reputation, and that's the whole reason why the code of conduct and the laws and all of these rules and regulations are being regulated even more these days, is so that we can get rid of that bad reputation, that we can show people that we are, first and foremost, we are registered, that we are qualified, we have done what we have what we should have done to get ourselves qualified, that we are conducting ourselves in a professional manner, so that we can get a better reputation, but also to mitigate these unspoken costs, right? And just as an example, quantities of wasted time by employees, right? So if we don't follow rules, there's a saying that we are putting out fires, right? So if rules aren't followed, consequences, issues pop up. Now we need to start putting out fires, and this is where we are not focused on what we should be doing, right? So wasted time by employees. Misuse of resources, performing menial tasks, right? So if we don't have a clear path on what we should be doing and how we should be doing, we are just going to misuse, and we're going to abuse, and we're going to waste resources, right? And sometimes very, very expensive resources, by performing menial tasks, and tasks that's not, well, might not fit into the code of conduct, or against the law, but just not getting us to that end point in serving our consumers in terms of marketing, negotiating, and selling property or leasing property, right? And then there are legal implications, that can have lots of consequences, and costs as well, right? So legal cost, wasting of the court's time, and time spent on damage control or putting out that fires, as previously discussed, right? So it's not just always the actual tangible costs of compliance. Sometimes there are unspoken costs. So it's not just normal fines, it can be other things in terms of time and effort as well lost. It's not always a monetary value that one can put into cost for non-compliance. Right, so we're moving on to the principles of ethics. Again, we said earlier, it's the moral compass. It's our moral principles, right? And these are simply determined by right against wrong. If we have to break it down to layman's terms, your moral principles is what is right, what is wrong, right? And this is where we have our code of conduct, we have our laws, we have our rules and regulations. And I want to remind you all that it's not just code of conduct from the PPRA, laws from the Property Practitioners Act. There are also rules and regulations and principles in terms of, let's say, a multi-listing system. If you work in a multi-listing system and you understand a multi-listing system, rules and regulations within your office. So it goes beyond just our body that looks after the industry, which is the PPRA, right? It goes to your office, your business, industry, and all other stakeholders in terms of marketing, negotiating, selling, or leasing property, right? So principles of ethics basically sets out a minimum standard, right? So one should always strive to be better than that minimum standard. And I've heard somebody said once, and this is a very good example, is your morals is things that you stick to or you do when no one is around, when nobody's looking. Right, so it's that minimum standard. This is where also your occupational ideals come in. So you as an individual should also say, well, these are my ideals within my occupation. This is who I want to be. This is how I want to conduct myself. This is my reputation at the end of the day that I would like to enjoy within my career. Right, principles. These are set rules on how we will conduct ourselves, and virtues, right? And these are things, guys, that must not be compromised. We should stick to these standards, to these ideals and principles and virtues, because that at the end of the day will make sure that we have a good reputation. And that will, good reputation will always bring more business. It's also a very small industry. Very quickly you will find that if we don't set our standards high and we don't follow rules and regulations, very quickly that will become public knowledge to the consumer, and you will definitely simply just not get business. So this is also to make sure that we do run a morally sound business, and that we have a good reputation within the industry. Right. If we have a look at ethical dilemmas and conflicts, now this is now where things get interesting, where we start to see on how we're going to make our decisions on handling certain situations, when to walk away from situations, and a way to draw our line basically in terms of conducting ourselves, right? So lots of dilemmas or conflicts comes into play with mishandling of offers, right? So, and we can go through some examples. The Code of Conduct very clearly states that we shouldn't be auctioning off offers to clients, right? So if we take an offer, now this is a very good example. If we have multiple offers on the table, we should handle those offers individually. So you should take the first offer that you have received, you should take to your seller, and you should finish that offer completely, right? So either get a yes, I would like to proceed with this offer, or maybe let's submit a counter offer, or no, thank you, I would like to move on. Then one can only take the second or the third offer, right? So lots of times this is where conflict comes in, where you might have the first offer might be lower than your second offer, but it's always good to make sure that we ensure that the first offer is done, even though it might be a lower offer, right? And that we, again, this is where, let's just see where things tie in now, where we keep data confidential, right? So we don't disclose financial difficulties to sellers, and we conduct ourselves in a professional manner, right? Engaging in shady marketing practices. Yes, we see this often where facts are being misrepresented. There's a lot of deception. Latent and patent defects are not being disclosed. Guys, that is shady marketing practices, right? Putting out boards in front of property that aren't for sale, but hoping to attract clients. Those things we shouldn't be doing. It's conflicts, and that will just create, again, not just conflict with your peers, but it will create conflict with the general consumer. Prioritizing commissions, we see this a lot, where agents are so fixed on that commission that they will do and say anything just to make a transaction work, right? So they will, again, be deceitful, misrepresent facts, whatever the case might be, just to prioritize that commission. In fact, commission should be the last thing that we should be negotiating or discussing or even thinking about within a property transaction, right? Because sometimes commissions kind of blurs the lines for us, because that's what we fixated on. And the Code of Conduct is very, very clear on we need to prioritize our consumer, right, or our client, but never to the detriment of any other party. Failing to disclose property defects, yes, very, very important. Now we got disclosure forms that we need to fill out, but even in those forms, we need to be honest and we need to act with integrity to make sure that we do a proper property evaluation, that we know and we've asked the questions and we have done our due diligence to also understand any property defects and to make sure that they are being disclosed correctly to any other involving party. Right. And something that we don't see too often, but encouraging or accepting personal cover letters. This is where agents will send out letters or a motivation to swing a seller or a landlord into a specific direction. And this could be in terms of valuation, it could be in terms of a negotiation, it could be in terms of anything basically, getting your way, but in a deceitful manner, right? Those things we shouldn't be doing. We should always be honest. We should always act with integrity, right? The importance of ethics, it's staying up to date with current laws and versions of the code of conduct, right? We should never say, but I didn't know. Because the code of conduct and the act also very clearly says that it's our responsibility to stay up to date with current laws and versions of any code of conduct. And again, I'll remind you guys this again, it's not just official code of conducts and laws from statutory bodies. It is also general rules and regulations and principles and protocols within the greater industry, right? So within groups that you are practicing your career and your business in, within your office, or within conducting business with your peers, right? Ignorance absolutely is no excuse, right? And then obviously conduct ties in with professionalism as well, right? And we saw that as principles of ethics is being professional is so important, because that again will just shows that you are honest, that you are conducting yourself with integrity, that you're doing the right thing, you are conducting business that you may. So you registered, you are getting yourself qualified. All of those things tie into professionalism at the end of the day, and that ties into setting up a very good reputation within the industry for yourself and also your office that you're affiliated with, right? Very important. We look to self-evaluate and we look to ourselves as individuals, but also it sprouts a little bit further than that as well. We have to look at the umbrella or any affiliate that we do represent at the end of the day, because all of those things also will build up to a reputation of those affiliates as well. Right? So make sure that we are always acting and conducting ourselves in a professional manner. Right. Guidelines for developing a strong value statement. Right. So we set not only do we need to look at the code of conduct, or let's say formal code of conducts and laws and regulations and rules. Sometimes there's also value statements and virtues that we need to set up for ourselves. And just to assist with this and to give you guys a bit of a compass and guidelines for developing strong value statements, right? Make sure that we always use people first language, right? So layman terms, language that people can understand, right? Support the idea that your employees will be treated humanely and with empathy as valuable members of your working team, right? So always make sure that, again, there is respect for your peers, right? That you're conducting yourself in a professional manner. Explicitly state how and when actions that violate the code of conduct will be handled and who is involved in enforcement, right? So yes, we should know if we do violate the code of conduct, how will it be handled, who will be involved, who will enforce it, and what actions will be taken, right? Avoid using in-house jargon or terminology when possible, right? So use terms that everybody can understand. And again, so that there is no ignorance or people can't claim ignorance as I didn't know, right? It helps to ensure that those outside your organization can also understand. And again, this is a great recruiting tool as well, and gaining respect from your peers and your competition, right? Keep your values clear, simple, and proactive, and cover more complicated issues as standalone statements elsewhere in your code of conduct, right? So make sure that there is clear set out rules on this is the rule, this is how it will be enforced, this is how any violation will be handled, etc., etc. And if you are not enforcing any of these, if you're not in a position to enforce, make sure that you understand from an employee's perspective, right? So you understand what is expected of you, you understand what will happen when you violate, you understand all the terminology, and that there are clear, simple steps for you to be proactive to make sure that you keep in line and your moral compass is showing into the right direction. Right. Again, we need to understand if we have a look at the code of conduct is who is covered. You guys need to understand very clearly what the code of conduct is covering, and we spoke about that earlier. It looks at duties for the consumer, so the consumer is covered. It looks at duties for property practitioners, so property practitioners are covered. And it looks at duties for the industry, so that the industry is covered. So it is definitely a door that swings both ways to make sure that everybody knows who is covered and how they are covered and what are the rules and how they can be enforced, right? Again, there is specifications on the process for reporting complaints. Very, very important. We can't have rules but not know how complaints will be handled if those rules are being transgressed. Very important, you guys should also understand is what code of conduct or what rules, what is covered outside of the workplace, right? So, what is your workplace expecting of you when you are not on the clock, right? Some offices or some businesses have quite strict rules, but it's important that you understand the rules within your organization. Again, ignorance is no excuse. And then, last but not least, the consequences, right, of any of this. So, if code of conduct rule regulations are being transgressed, what are the consequences and how it will be dealt with? Right, very important that you guys understand this, so that you can also conduct yourself accordingly. Right, I mentioned self-evaluation a little bit earlier, but this is very important, right? So it's the ability or the skill that you guys need to or that muscle you kind of need to exercise is to examine yourself, right? So to check your progress on your rules and regulations, on how you are following, how you understand, and if you are within those rules, right? So to check your progress, to monitor your abilities, and to understand your strengths and weaknesses, right? And to build on that. So if one understands your strength, you can work harder on those strengths. If you understand your weaknesses, you can get to a point where you can say, well, then I will work around these weaknesses, and maybe turn them into my strength, right? So important that we understand self-evaluation of conduct as well, so that we can, if we understand the content of any conduct, or code or law, rules or regulations, that we can examine ourselves accordingly and know whether we are up to standard with those rules and regulations. Right, so questions that one can ask yourself if you do self-evaluation is where have you excelled, right? If you have excelled in something, that means that that is a strength, and you should spend more time and effort on that. What achievements are you most proud of? If we are proud of our achievements, we will strive to be better. We will strive to maintain those achievements and those standards. Where do you feel the need for more support? So there might be some weaknesses within the industry or within your organization, right? If you can identify that, you can evaluate it, you can ask for it, and you can get more support. What goals do you wish you could have accomplished, right? So here we can see, well, where we might not have met our goals and where we can become better to maybe meet them down the line. What do you like about your job? What do you dislike about the industry? What improvements could be made to maybe make your role a little bit easier? What components of your job would you like to eliminate and why? And this is where your strength and your weaknesses kind of ties in, and this is where one can see where your focus should be, and also again where that ties into those rules and those standards and values and virtues. And what career goals do you hope to accomplish in the next 3 years? Right, so these are some questions that one can ask if you want to self-evaluate, if you want to see where you are within conduct, within ethical business practices, and how to get better. At the end of the day, the idea for self-evaluation is to see where's my shortcomings and where can I improve. Right, so through self-assessment, employees can feel more engaged in the appraisal process. Right, so you will know where 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 is my incentives coming from, and am I getting incentives, and is it working for me? You can gain greater insights and set future goals for improvement. Feel more confident about your abilities, right? So up your skill brings more confidence. Enhance capacity building. So maybe you can see these are my weaknesses or these are my mistakes. How can I make them better, not do them, or make corrections quicker. Select training programs that are most suited to needs. Again, we know that we need to be up to date with laws and any improvement in the industry as well. So make sure that we strive to get ourselves competent. Develop an inquiring mind for problem solving. I think one of our main skills lacking in the industry is problem solving, because negotiation is just that. It is overcoming the objective, right? Solving problems. Become more accountable, and we can only become more accountable if we know what we are accountable for, and if we take accountability for that. If we feel valued within our industry, obviously that will make us feel more motivated to learn new skills, to kind of exercise that muscle to become better within our industry, with our moral compass guiding us better. All right, so lastly, we're going to have a look at integration. This is now where businesses come together, and where businesses sometimes integrate for purposes of gain financially, or to get the industry bigger, or whatever the case might be, right? So business integration is the process of one company acquiring another company and then merging those operations, right? And we see that in our industry quite a lot, where one office will merge with another to become stronger, to maybe take market share within an area quicker, or even brands merging, where they feel that they can, if they do merge, they can become better and do more at the end of the day. Right. So this is why merging is kind of also very important, right? So if we have a look at merging, there are a couple of different types of merging, right? So we have horizontal merging integration, vertical integration, forward integration, backward integration, and conglomeration, right? So if we have a look at the differences, where forward integration is where businesses integrate or they merge, where they have more or less the the, the same business, right? So this is, like I said, where offices merge. Same offices do exactly the same, sell real estate, but merge into one. Right. Vertical integration. This is where an organization buys a company in the same industry, but at an earlier stage of production. Right. So, as an example, a game production company buys a company with artificial intelligence technology. Right. So, forward integration, that is a form of integration. It's a form of vertical integration, but it's where the organization takes over a company in the same industry, but at a later stage of production. For example, a podcast streaming service that hosts other shows. They begin to create and stream its content through the purchase of a production company. Backward integration is when an organization acquires a company that supplies raw material services. This merger is a form of backward integration, and that's also a form of vertical integration. So you guys can see how the integrations also integrate with each other. And then conglomeration, less frequent, but this is where organizations acquires a company providing an unrelated product or service, right? So they're actually just expanding their business, making new business, right? Right, so benefits of integration, growth, obviously, yes. No one will do it just for the love of it. Product or service improvements, higher profits, cost saving, new market access, increased efficiency, lower competition, more variety, and higher market share. And there are some disadvantages or potential disadvantages of integration is reduction in quality, lower returns, and less flexibility. And we can see here that if we look at integration as a whole, it seems to be that there are more advantages of integration or merging than there is disadvantages. And I suppose that's why businesses do it. Right, so this then completes the section, module 2. The information session. If you have any questions or concerns or queries, please don't hesitate to contact myself or Tim, and we will answer them or assist you wherever we can. We thank you for joining us today, and we will see you in the next session. Thank you.